So we'll start off. It's a fairly long set of slides. As you probably know, that things are still in chaos. Every few hours, there's a report that there might be a coalition or there might not be a coalition. So we really don't know. So just to try and give you a sense of what happened in the elections. So there was low voting, 67.4 is low. There were times when it was almost 80%, then it went down to 75% or so, but it's going down all the time with basically two reasons. One reason is that we don't have absentee voting. So as you probably remember, physically on election day, you have to go to your particular voting booth. Now that's caused a lot of problems this time. Firstly, because of Corona, some people are worried about traveling. And if you haven't got your own car and you have to go by public transport, a train or a bus, then some people really didn't want to go to another city perhaps. If they'd moved in the last few months in another city, they couldn't get in their own private transport, they wouldn't want to move. So that's the one reason. The other reason is that there are fortunes of Israelis overseas all the time. Our fourth son is overseas. He's in California at the moment. So he's registered as a voter, but he obviously can't vote. So there were years, by the way, that a lot of people would travel back. They would make their travel plans to Israel at a time of elections, and that would push up the numbers. So that's really what's going on. In addition to which, there's obviously voter exhaustion. I mean, 4 elections, one after the other, is driving everyone crazy. And if you're not really committed to the political system and you feel it isn't going to change, then you don't turn up and vote. So what have we got at the moment? So we'll look down here. We're through various colors. Radical right, religious Zionists. They're essentially racist, homophobic, and totally against anyone who isn't Orthodox. That's essentially where they are. And they did well. Bibi Netanyahu encouraged some of the Likud voters to vote for them because he wanted to make sure that they would come into power. And this guy that we see over here, Ben Gvir, he's a total racist. I mean, there's no other way of describing him. We've never had a party like this in the Knesset until now. We've had some right-wing people, we've had some racists, but never a full party which is totally committed to the radical right, extreme right. We had the Kahanas, Meir Kahana. So this party is essentially a Kahanas party. They really don't want Arabs around. They actually say that Arabs who aren't loyal, and one doesn't know what loyalty means, should be expelled. So that gives us an idea of where they are. So we have center-right, Likud. They got 30 seats, less than they got in the last election. And center-right is also Yamina, which got 7. So it's believed that these three, 6, 30, and 7 will go together, but there's a question mark here because Naftali Bennett hasn't yet decided. The 2 other parties which essentially go in with Likud over the years are Shas, whose power is constantly increasing, and United Torah Judaism. These are Sephardim. Altogether, they lead to 60. So it's been believed, but not yet certain, that this group will go together, which will give Bibi a 59 number. The reason I haven't put down 59 because we're not sure yet. It's still very unclear. There are 2 right parties which are anti-Bibi, Yisrael Beitenu, Yvette Lieberman, a Russian-speaking guy, and New Hope, Tikva Chadasha, which got 6 seats. These 2 together are both right-wing, hardline right-wing, by the way, whose commonality, which brings them back to the 13 you see here, is that they both don't want Bibi. So you probably know that the election was, we want Bibi, we don't want Bibi. So everything has become very confusing. Old lines of left, right, pro-settlement, anti-settlement, all those things are not quite clear because it's become so much tied up with Bibi Netanyahu over here. Then we have the center left and left, the blue and white party. Gantz got 8, Yesh Atid got 17, second largest party. Labour Party got 7. By the way, this was a success because Labour Party's almost disappeared. It's been gone through tremendous internal crises. So the fact that they're up to a 7-seat situation is doing well. And Meretz got 6. They really don't have this number of voters, but people were very frightened they were going to disappear. So you have that strange situation that people who may have voted maybe Yesh Atid over here and would have given them another few seats, people who were Yesh Atid people moved in some cases to vote for the Labour Party, and I think in a significant number of cases moved to Meretz, which ensured that they will get over the threshold figure, which is 3.25%. And here we can see the Arab Party, sorry, at the bottom there. The Arab Joint List, there are 2 Arab parties now. They broke up the Joint List, which last election got 15 seats and got 6 now. They split up, and there's a United List, which is an Islamist party. It's kind of pro-Hamas. They came down to 4, and altogether the 2 Arab groups got 10. So let's try and quickly look at a big picture of the last 4 elections. Likud, as you can see, is all-time low, 30. The last election got 36. The ultra-Orthodox are totally consistent. 2 parties together always getting 16. The Yamina party, Naftali Bennett, is more or less where he was before. Religious Zionist is a new party. That is now giving them 59. The anti-Bibi crowd, New Hope, is a new party. Avigdor Lieberman, Yisrael Beitenu, kind of is pretty much on the 5 to 7 kind of level. Yair Lapid and Benny Gantz, they've come together and gone apart, so it doesn't really make sense. Nitzan and the Labour Meretz combination changed, so it doesn't really have a figure. Joint List, as I mentioned, did get 15, now it's 6. And United List, Ram, get 4 seats, and it's a totally new party. Theoretically, therefore, it's 59 pro-Bibi, 61 anti-Bibi, but Israeli politics, you never know that this is going to be in any way true in the next few days. What some new aspects about what's in the Knesset? 37 parties ran, which is kind of more or less what it is. Why so many parties? You get free TV and radio time by standing. It's easier to become a party, a certain amount of money. You need a certain number of signatures, not all that many. So only 2 of the 30 parties ran in the previous election. And of this large group, altogether of all the parties, 13 got in the Knesset. So we have a vast number of very, very small parties, ranging from, as you can see at the bottom here, the smallest party got 53 votes, and others of them got up to 1,000. But you can imagine 1,000 votes right around the country is totally meaningless. 16 new members of Knesset, it's kind of more or less the average. 30 women is more or less where we've been for a number of years, 25% more or less. In the old days, by the way, in the 1950s, they were about 10%. So at least we're up to 25, not great, but better than it used to be. Each seat is approximately worth 37,000 votes. So you can imagine how far many of these small parties were away from getting past the threshold. The 13 parties who got into the Knesset received the threshold figure, at least 3.25%, and the party one lower received under 1%. So it means the Knesset is a good Knesset in terms of representation. Just something about the system, because it's a chaotic system, but it's a very fair system, because this is the only known system which really enables the overwhelming majority of voters to have a vote. If you know anything about the British system is terrible, because you have a party which might have done extremely well in 30 or 40% of the constituencies, but has absolutely no representatives in the House of Commons. So, you know, whatever we say, This is a fair system, but the reality of it is chaos. Hi, it's good to see you, Glynis. So how did, what happened? Let's look, I want to look at two phenomena here, and I'm going to leave time for questions, so we can come back to any issues you have. I took a random set of towns and cities just to give a sense. The voting figures are amazing, by the way. For those of you who are totally interested in Israeli politics, which is kind of an unusual trait for anyone who's sane, you get the results of tiny little villages. Hebron with some 100 voters or something, you get the total breakdown of each and every constituency, as you do in the States. But for Israelis to do a political analysis, it really gives a tremendous sense. So 60% of Israelis voted, a little bit under the overall voting system. What is labor? So if we just take the top 5, just as a case study, this is left of center, right, left of center, left of center, left of center. So if Tel Aviv was the overall dominating area, if it was the California of Israel, this would obviously make the voting system much better. Although Tel Aviv has a large population, like any other country, tremendous amount of much smaller cities. If we go down, we see that very, very small groups of distinctively right-wing parties in Tel Aviv. So, if you live in Tel Aviv, people who live in Tel Aviv, you talk about a bubble. That expression is a little bit incorrect, but if we do use it, you can easily live in Tel Aviv without hardly coming to any serious right-winger except a certain number of Likudnikim. So that's really the phenomenon of Tel Aviv. Jerusalem, exactly the opposite. I mean, the differences between the two cities, we've always known it, but as years go by, it becomes even stronger. We as a family lived in Jerusalem for about 45 years. And it was amazing, even in those 45 years, how the city changed. So this is totally Ashkenazi, Haredim, Likud once again, Shas. Interestingly, pay attention, by the way, United Torah Judaism is a large city party, Jerusalem, Bnei Brak, Bet Shemesh, essentially. Shas is a national party. It spreads out through all the little moshavim and towns, the development towns. This is where Shas really gets its 9 seats. And religious Zionists, powerful, a new party, remember, to get 9% in any city is impressive. Yamin is a right-wing party. So if we look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 parties in Jerusalem, they're all right-wing. And the left of center, left-wing parties, become very, very low down. As you people might remember, you can actually locate where labor and Meretz people are living. In the old days, it used to be Rechavia, less so Rechavia now. Emek Refaim area, you'll find that 1 or 2 of the richer areas of Jerusalem is essentially where you'd find your labor and Meretz voters. Yesh Atid would be a little bit broader. Haifa's gone through amazing change. Haifa used to be what was called the Red City. In the old days, Haifa was a Labor Party center. It's changed tremendously for pretty good reasons. Haifa accommodation is a lot cheaper than Tel Aviv. So people who are at a slightly lower income level are likely, if they could choose living in Tel Aviv or Haifa, they would actually go and live in Haifa. Low voting figures. It's 12% under the national average. In a city, by the way, people aren't traveling all that much. They've now started, but essentially on voting day, people were quite close to their homes. So something's happened in Haifa in terms of people not being interested in politics anymore or less interested. So you have in the top four, just to take the top four, right wing, left wing, maybe right wing, left wing. Joint list 7% of Haifa population. This is about the Arab population of Haifa. Haifa used to have a very large Arab population until the War of Independence, Nakba for the Arabs. But a substantial number of the, in a certain area are Arabs. Labor and Meretz are down low there. Efrat, the large city of one of the large areas of the West Bank, totally, if you take out the 1.7%, if you want to, as a right-wing religious person, live anywhere in the country and feel that the people around you are all yours, this is where you live. A lot of the people, by the way, here are Americans. Efrat has a significantly high American population. They would probably, in the majority of cases, vote Yamina, but also a fairly considerable amount for the religious right. So we're looking where the radical right in Israel exists. This is really one of the places. You go to Efrat, by the way, which is a moderate, in social welfare terms, it's a relaxed middle class area. You all probably know that the red roof houses that you see here is almost an indication of wealth, because although we don't have snow here, at a certain time, about 30 years ago, having a sloping red roof became a status symbol in Israeli architecture. So this is an area Efrat people feel distinctly comfortable in terms of the socioeconomic realm. But what we've got here are 1 out of every 5 Efrat voters was a religious right person. Hebron, clear. Hebron is 4/5 of all the small population in Hebron. There are only about 220 people living there, are religious Zionists. The fact that there's 1%, one is amazed. Rafa, by the way, is a religious, medical-oriented right-wing party. Very small, but you can see 7 people in Hebron went against what is suggested. I almost wonder whether these 2 people got confused with the little pieces of paper that you put into the polling booth. It's very confusing. You go in there, and if you're not a lot of Israelis aren't fluent Hebrew speakers, and you see all these little pieces of paper on this, in front of you. And every now and again, I'm convinced, I've been looking very, very closely to see, what was happening. There were always a few people who obviously got mixed up. So I can only imagine 2 people who didn't know Hebrew voted for the Labour Party, then were then told afterwards they'd made a mistake. Ariel, the central city of the West Bank. An interesting point about Ariel, it used to be claimed that people were living in the West Bank regardless of political views. It's been proved incorrect. For a long, long time, people said, doesn't matter what you think politically, they're only going there because of the cheaper apartments and it's very nice and you have land and things like that. Increasingly, we're beginning to see that it's not quite exactly that. That we look at what's happening here in Ariel, Likud, Israel Beitenu, Yamina, New Hope, Tikva Hadasha, all these 5, in all these 5 areas, we're seeing all these 5 political parties, we're seeing all very, very distinctly right party, religious Zionists also, and then you have such a very small percentage of people who blue and white, Kachol Levan, Shas, and Labor. Shas is also right-wing. So if we just exclude Shas and look blue and white and Labor, we see that to live in Ariel is very, very much in a totally right-wing kind of environment. Once again, I'm mentioning it because of the comments that used to come up that it's only about economic issues and not about political. Savion, one of the 2 richest towns in Israel. Savion, Kfar Shmariah are at the top of it. What do we see over here? Yesh Atid. Something about Yesh Atid, by the way. Yesh Atid is quite an elitist party. If you go to the towns, small towns in some cases, where you have a very high standard of living, you will by and large find a very high voting pattern that we see here. So that's what we see. Likud, certain number, blue and white, merit, very well spread out, but distinctly a fairly high level. Are you seeing this red here on your screens? Please remove, or is it okay? It's okay.
I see it, but it's okay.
Okay, fine. Herzliya, certainly not as wealthy as Kfar Shmariah or Savion, but at the same time, a lot of Herzliya, obviously Herzliya Patuach, but other parts of Herzliya is comfortable middle class, once again expressed by Yesh Atid. Likud, blue and white, Labour, Meretz, New Hope, kind of a sign of a kind of central Israeli society in terms of voting pattern. Now we come to the fascinating Yotzei Dofen ones. Yerka is a Druze village up on the very north western border. It's far north, pretty close to the sea. I've slept there 2 nights. I had a colleague from Tel Aviv University who invited a group of us to go and stay with them. Druze, totally Druze, fairly low voting pattern. They vote Likud and Yisrael Beitenu. Now, this is a kind of significant thing. It's one of those issues where terminology is very problematic. In all the figures of population groups that you have in Israel, you have the term miutim, minorities, and the Druze are put in with the Arabs. But if you ask a Druze, are you an Arab? They'll say no. It's true that they have a religion which was initially connected to Islam, but broke off many centuries ago, but they see themselves as Israeli. And I think this kind of figure indicates that when in Rome, be like the Romans, the Druze wanting to be Israeli, they're doing anything to be Israeli, of which serving in the army is one of them. Some of them object, but the majority of Druze are happy to be serving in the army. What you do is vote for a national right-wing party, and that's what they do. And not only that, they prove themselves even more nationalist by voting for Yisrael Beitenu, which is essentially a Russian-speaking party. So it gives a whole interesting kind of picture of what's really happening in the Druze community. In the evening that there must have been about 10 of us or something were there, they had a panel discussion. And it was fascinating because they essentially had all the voices that we see here. They didn't tell us, by the way, that the strongest groups are essentially the right-wing Jewish groups. 8% of them vote for the joint list, the Arab party. So that really indicates that only a small percentage see themselves in any way at all as Arabs. 6.6% for Shas. Now, why do they vote for Shas? I mean, you really ask yourself what's going on there. The reason they vote for Shas is 2 reasons. Firstly, the more traditional Arabs, Muslim Arabs, who don't want any changes in gender issues or any of those kind of social issues, have voted for Shas in the past. And the other reason that there were years when the Minister of Interior was a Shas member, and he would allocate funds to Druze villages. So those are the 2 reasons why essentially Druze have gone for Shas. Yesh Atid small and Meretz small. Daliat HaKarmel, another Druze village, just to show that Yerka wasn't an exception. Druze, very low voting, top Yisrael Beitenu, but second, Yesh Atid. What does that say? The picture you can see here of Dalia Tar Carmel is large parts of Dalia are actually middle class. And like the Jewish population, I said of Jews voting Yesh Atid as a kind of comfortable middle class comment, you find exactly the same with Dalia Tar Carmel. Dalia Tar Carmel, by the way, has a lot of interaction with the Jewish community, the marketplaces, which we see over here indicated. So this is really, you know, so you have ethnic identity and socioeconomic commentary, which comes up again and again. Once again, pay attention, low figures voting for the Arab list. Muslim, very Muslim. This is the 33% is a clear sign of total disillusionment of Israeli Arabs with the political system. They've just had enough of it. They feel that their own party, the Joint List, didn't really do anything for them, and it's not because of the Joint List, but they've been isolated. Arabs have been isolated from the political system from the very early period. So many of the Fahim people didn't turn up. For those of them who did turn up to vote, of the alternative, they voted for Joint List. But one has to see that 80% rather in the context of a very, very low kind of a voting figure. You have the break-off group, RAM, United List and United Arab List over here, 14%. By the way, it's going to be an interesting party to pay attention to because RAM, as we're going to see a little later, is very much a Bedouin party. It's the poorest socioeconomic group of Arab society, of whom the Bedouin are very much there. And they've had a very limited voice in politics in the past. If we look at the rest of the parties, the Jewish votes are very low. And by the way, a party like Meretz, which one might have imagined would have managed to get Arab voters, has actually failed. They haven't done it. They didn't make a big effort. They've got an Arab representative in the Knesset at the moment, but they really haven't done a good job in going out to the Arab communities until now. Although their policies might be appealing to the Arabs want to see the members. They want to feel that the MKs are really caring for them, and neither Meretz or Labour have done a good job in that realm. Look at Rahat, Bedouin village in the north. I don't know if any of you have been to Rahat. Rahat is chaos. I've been there a number of times. Absolute chaos. The Bedouin didn't want to live in Rahat. They've always wanted to live in their own village. There are a significant number of what are called until today, unrecognized villages where they don't have water and electricity. It's a crazy system, makes no sense at all. And the government, various Israeli governments have tried to urbanize them, feeling that them spread out in all these little villages in the southern Negev in south of Beersheba area is a crazy. So what do we find with the 84%? We find the Bedouin, even more so than the regular Arabs, are disillusioned. But there they've gone, 2/3 of them have gone for the Arab, the United List, the United Arab Lists. 2/3 have gone for a party which they believe will care for Bedouin interests. Vote for Joint List, and once again, strange phenomenon of 6%. Remember, some Bedouins serve in the army. It could well be that the figure who vote of 6% are Bedouin who serve in the army and therefore somehow feel in one way or the other connected to the government. United Torah Judaism will quickly go through some of the parties, not all of them. United Torah Judaism, just look, by the way, this was a funeral. This was during Corona. This was when there were restrictions of 20 people maximum together. Now, there were 2 funerals on the same day. Each of them looked like this. It is massive. Well over, it must be over 50, 60, 70,000 people. at a time when it was forbidden to be together more than a handful of people. So why? It's all about this gentleman, Bibi Netanyahu, and this gentleman, Mr. Litzman. You put these two together, and it basically meant during the Corona period, it didn't matter what you did, whether the Haredi broke the laws or not, there were actually no problem with it. The police were absolutely inactive in the Haredi areas. They weren't so active in other areas, but certainly in the Haredi areas. And that really means that the United Torah Judaism is totally committed to Netanyahu. There's no other person who we think they could even relate to. United Torah Judaism, Bnei Brak, Bet Shemesh, Jerusalem, as I mentioned earlier. This is really the Ashkenazi Haredi world growing in unbelievable ways. The average family size of Haredim in Israel today is 7 children per family. So we can see what's going to be happening. We also see that they had 7% in Netivot, which are North African immigrants who normally vote Shas, by the way. But Dafka, we know that some of them still vote for United Torah Judaism. And in Yerucham, a small, vulnerable development town, also United Torah Judaism. You probably know that the Haredim not finding housing in Bnei Brak, Bet Shemesh, and Jerusalem are moving out, moving more and more to some of the smaller areas where in some places they've even taken over some of the areas. Shas is a different kind of phenomenon. Shas is highest in small development towns. Netivot is an excellent case study. Basically, North African immigrants near Gaza. Also, obviously, some in Bnei Brak, Bet Shemesh, Kiryat Malachi, very poor, undeveloped little town. So that would be a Shas area. Jerusalem would be a Shas area. Yerucham would be a Shas area, out in the desert. Dimona in the desert, Shas area. So socioeconomic Mizrahi connections would essentially say that Shas is going to be a party that will not only be strong, it has 9 MKs at the moment, but essentially has the potential to grow. Let's take a right-wing party, Yamina. Yamina is an interesting party. Naftali Bennett is modern Orthodox. I've forgotten, I've got a blank on her name. She used to be the Minister of Justice. She's Chilonit. And they presented themselves as a right-wing party of Chilonim and Datiyim. Now, it seems to be that the majority of people are modern Orthodox, but Ayelet Shaked, Ayelet Shaked, she managed to, as Chilonit, managed to bring in people. By the way, she's committed to reducing the power of the High Court, of the Supreme Court. So what do we have with Yamina? In Kibbutz Shluchot, a modern Orthodox kibbutz, they did well. Efrat, in the Gush Etzion, they did well. Tekoa, a small moshav, they did well. Bat Ain is the most radical anti-Palestinian focus village in the whole of the country. It's Baalei Tshuva people, at-risk youth, who 16% voted for Yamina, but 58% of the Bat Ain population voted for religious Zionists. Also, Yamina gets support from Shderot, once again, vulnerable areas, and Yerucham. Naftali Bennett is a bitchonist, a security kind of guy, and therefore that also means that those small towns near Gaza, which are sometimes under attack, are going to favor anyone who seems to be a kind of a military person who will protect their interest. Yisrael Beiteinu just confirms what we said before. Usafia, another Druze village, Yarka or Yerka, spelt in different ways. Daliat HaKarmel, they get well. By the way, Yisrael Beiteinu also did well in Katsarin, which is on the Golan Heights. Yisrael Beiteinu, Ariel, Beersheva, Haifa, Kiryat Shmona, and even in Kibbutz Yahel, I put this down for fun, even in Kibbutz Yahel, 8% of the members of Kibbutz Yahel. Not all Kibbutz Yahel voters are Chavrei Kibbutz. So you can easily have people who are living there who aren't members of the kibbutz. Otherwise, it's fairly hard to imagine that the regular kibbutznik of Yahel would vote for Likud. Yesh Atid, once again, to confirm what I said earlier, Kfar Shmariau, Even Yehuda, where we live, it's a comfortable middle-class town. The Ganya Bet, old-time kibbutzim do it. Daliat Carmel, we spoke about it. Ranana, comfortable city. Yahel, Lotan, and Nachal Oz, just as an example of kibbutzim. These all go for quite considerable number for Yesh Atid. It's important to remember the old days of kibbutzim voting for Labour Party are over. There are alternatives now, and that's been expressed by kibbutz people. Although, at the same time, certain kibbutzim still vote Labour, but they're small kibbutzim. Tura, Nachal Oz, Lotan, Yahel, Tel Aviv, that's where the Labour Party votes. But obviously, these figures are very small. Labour essentially survives by what happens in Tel Aviv. Meretz, kibbutzim once again, I put in Lotan for obvious reasons. Kafar Qasim, by the way, interesting figure. Kafar Qasim is a problematic Arab village. They were involved in a terrible incident in the 1950s where a significant number of the inhabitants were slaughtered by the army. Horrible, horrible kind of event. You would have imagined that they might have gone in with the Arab parties, but I think what's very important to still remember in Arab villages, you have powerful Chamula leaders, powerful clan leaders. And sometimes when we're looking at an Arab village, you have to take a whole lot of different kind of issues into consideration, of which one has to be the power of the Chamula. Kfar Qasim has I've met some of them, very, very committed centrist and left of center kind of people, well educated, and that would explain kind of quite a kind of unusual phenomenon of 20% more or less of Kfar Qasim voting for them. Usafia does well, and Meretz gets a certain amount of votes from Savion as well. Religious Zionists, Hebron, 81%, Bat Ayin, that radical group, village in the West Bank, Kiryat Arba, Efrat, very, very clear where they get their power from. Just some concluding comments. We've got some time for discussion. Who's to blame, Bibi or the system? There is so much being spoken about, obviously, and we're in our fourth election, that we might be going into a fifth one in October. In a sense, Bibi, no great friend of mine, but Bibi, all that Bibi does, he takes advantage of the system which exists. So he isn't a dictator. I know some people like to use the term. He's not a dictator. Probably the best term for him is an illiberal Democrat. He runs by a democratic system. He takes advantage of the democracy as much as he can, which politicians tend to do. But it's clear that no one expected when they tried to establish the Israeli political structure that it would reach the kind of level it did. So the system today is a problem, but how one changes the system is a kind of a mammoth task. It's another discussion, but it's unlikely to imagine that the system can be changed, at least in the foreseeable future. What we really need is for small parties to join together. The reality is Meretz, Labour, and Yesh Atid, and even Benny Gantz's Kahol Levan, blue and white, could essentially be together. But the gap between the left of Meretz and even the right of Benny Gantz is not an impossible combination. You know, you look at the American your parties and the Democrats and the Republicans, you know that the range between left and right in any party is tremendous. We could live with this, essentially. It's clear that Yemina, Tikva Chadasha, New Hope, and Likud could eventually be together. What happened in Israel is that in 1949, in the first election, a trend was established of small parties, and it's really never changed. So it doesn't matter if we're in a second or third generation, that we're still very, very much behaving in a sense of what used to exist in the past. Sorry, I'll go back. Women are less than 30%. And here comes a very important point: unwillingness of talented people to enter and stay in politics. There are very, very few members of Knesset, and I've met over the years, over all the years, I've met a chunk of them. It's very, very rare that I sit with someone and I say, wow, you know, that's someone I really am happy is my representative or could be my representative. And it's clear that what's happening as time goes by, and being a Knesset member means that more than anything else, you're facing election after election after election, and not developing anything is going to mean that the kind of people we need in politics are not prepared to go into politics. Just to very quickly end off, electoral exhaustion is clear. The amount of people who I met and spoke to before the last election, a few weeks ago, who said they just haven't got the energy to go and vote anymore, which is indicated by the low voting figures. Today, only 29, and there was a good poll, serious poll, only 29 of the Israeli population think elections will solve the political stalemate. So even when you vote, even if you turn out, and even if you decide not to sort of go somewhere else on election day, but stay in your own area, even there, we've got a very small, under 1/3 of the Israeli population believe that elections are of any value now. And the last one is total lack of trust by political leaders towards their colleagues. It isn't only ideology, it's just something about, happens, I think, often in politics. I mean, if we look at what's happening in American politics in Georgia today, we see that politics don't necessarily bring out good parts in people. And I think that's what's happening in Israel at the moment. It's kind of the people who so often, it's kind of, and everyone talks about it. If, in fact, every single leader says of the other, put your ego on the side. And that same person who says that has a bigger ego as anything. Okay, thanks to you. I'll stop share. Let's move over to any questions and comments that you want to ask.
Paul, thank you so much. It always, we are benefiting, and hearing your voice brings us all back to our days in school when we thought things were so crazy with Ariel Sharon on the horizon. I'll be brief. I guess my big question: what's your forecast? You know, this is great analysis. What do you think is the most likely thing to happen next?
Fifth election. It's terrible. It is terrible. You know, let me try and put things in context. Political chaos in a country where we're evaluated, and I think it's a correct figure, we are the 12th happiest country in the world. The United States is the 19th. So 12th happiest country in the world. What does that mean? If we look at life in Israel, affordable healthcare, we know that what happened with vaccinations was because of our unbelievable healthcare system. We look at cheap education. We look at cheap universities. We look at buildings. You know, we have the fourth highest number of building cranes in the world. You know, everything's being built here. So we're in a very, very unusual situation in a country where the political reality is chaos and the living reality of people is very comfortable. Israelis are, obviously some Israelis are leaving. A lot of Israelis are coming back to Israel because general life living standards in Israel are so comfortable. So why do I say the fifth election is a high possibility? If, and I don't know it'll happen, if Yamina and Tikva Hadasha, New Hope, say they will definitely not go within Bibi, he's missing 2 MKs. You know, it's not difficult. If 2 people leave from Yamina and New Hope, or even from blue and white, from Gantz's party, then Bibi's got the majority, and obviously there won't be another election. But as we see, if people, what they say is correct, at the moment, Bibi hasn't got 61, and that's the issue. Now, there's one other possibility which would make my prediction incorrect. We've got this new party, RAM, Islamic right-wing traditional party, but you don't know what new political, new Chavrei Knesset, new Knesset members will do. If two RAM people hear from Bibi that he is prepared to invest 20 million shekel, not a lot of money, 20 million shekel into improving the position of the Bedouin villages for those people, for the Bedouin villages, regardless of who's prime minister, it doesn't matter, as long as they're going to get considerable, what for them is considerable amount of money to improve their living conditions. That's why, I think we're going to a fifth election, but on the other hand, it can change just by two members of Knesset, two of the 61 anti-Bibi people going over to Bibi, and the whole thing has changed. That hasn't changed Bibi's national status, because next week he's going on trial, and it's going to be a long trial. But I think what's happened with Bibi is his image is on the decline now. You can't be a prime minister for 5 elections, or at the moment 4 elections, and really imagine that people are going to be impressed with you. And therefore, there's been a breakaway from Likud. We see it went down from 36 to 30. Some went to religious Zionists, some went to Tikva Chadasha. So I think what essentially we're finding, I think there's going to be a moving away by Likud members to other parties. It might mean the end of Bibi, but it doesn't mean the end of political chaos. So that's what I'd like to say about predictions. I always say, only a fool predicts anything. I'm a fool. Any other questions or comments? Yeah, Neil?
Of course, I'm hearing this through the lens of what's going on here in the States, but the low voter turnout, and I'm kind of, if I had to guess any country that would have accepted absentee ballot or some electronic form of, voting, because that would have changed that number. I'm surprised Israel. Is there some concerted effort to specifically disenfranchise voters in Israel by a particular party?
It came about in the 1950s. There was a discussion early on absentee voting of one kind or the other. And it was sent, the answer was, and it was across the political map, they said, if you don't live in Israel and you've been living out of Israel for an extended period of time, you shouldn't have the right to decide what should happen in the country for those citizens who are living there. So that was basically the answer. Now, no one knows what would really change if you could vote by being in Australia or America or anywhere else. We don't really know. It used to be believed that Israelis out of Israel become more right-wing. Maybe they kind of speak more right-wing, but I don't think they would vote more right-wing. So, I don't think it would change in a significant manner. But, Anil, your point is right. It would definitely put up the figures. I believe that the 67% of voters would be somewhere in the region of 75% of all the Israelis all around the world would vote. We don't have the exact figure, but there are a considerable number. Wherever you go in the world, an Israeli who's still on the voters roll has been living there. Sometimes they come back and vote and sometimes they don't. So, 75% for Israel in its maximum figure is still very, very low. For us, it's low. But in world terms, it's, as you people know, in America, where the figures in many cases are so much lower, it doesn't seem so bad. Any other questions? Anyone?
We have time for one more. It's
Oh,
we do have a hard stop on the hour.
Sure.
Well, I don't want to take it from anybody else, but can I ask one more?
One more. I had put one in the chat. Did anyone see that?
Oh, go for it, Randy.
Oh, Randy.
Now.
Hi, Paul.
Okay,
Is there any serious challenge to his leadership in Likud?
No, none at all. As soon as you challenge Bibi, you have one alternative, and that's to go and form a new party. There's no Gideon Sa'ar, who challenged him, had to leave the party and form the New Hope. Can I very quickly go through the questions? We've got a few minutes, if that's okay. Haifa, Red City, Red City, somewhat different meaning in the States. Yeah, I agree. Okay, fine. Something about Moot. Sorry, I'm going through. Gilad Kariv, very important. I should have mentioned it. Very important. He's going to be lonely. He's going to be humiliated. He will be ignored. But it is, and I should have mentioned it earlier, it really is a very, very important issue. Gilad, for those of you who know him, is a tough guy. He's not a pushover. And he really couldn't care about the Haredim. And the fact that the voice is there is very, very important. So thanks for that question. And I should have really related it to that one. Okay, I think those were the points that I could see here.
Then I think,
okay.
Why don't we wrap up? Modim L'Simcha, Paul Liptz. Thank you, teacher.
Thank you,
Good to see you.
Thanks.
Paul.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
And, serious question, Paul.
Hashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. Come and visit us. And I want to say one last thing. Don't give up on us yet. We haven't given up on America. I say that with love. Okay. But all the best. Look after yourselves. Shalom, shalom.
Also available to speak to your congregation virtually, and I think he might start traveling again, perhaps next year. So there are opportunities to bring him to your community, and please consider doing so. Paul, you are a blessing. Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Thank you very much. Chag Sameach.